Welcome to the Pharmacy Inspection Podcast, where we discuss topics related to sterile and non-sterile compounding pharmacy in an effort to promote compliance and increase quality. The Pharmacy Inspection Podcast is a member of the Phrmacy Podcast Network, delivering quality and meaningful conversations and discussions about our pharmacy industry and the critical role pharmacists play in our healthcare systems. Learn more at pharmacypodcast.com. Please welcome your hosts, Bryan Prince and Seth DePasquale.
Hello, compounding pharmacy colleagues. Welcome to the Pharmacy Inspection Podcast, where we talk about all things compounding, usually with a guest that brings to the table a wealth of knowledge. And this week is no exception. Today we have with us Java Coleman, who consults pharmacies and other FDA-regulated industries on process improvement. I think this is going to be an excellent show because honestly, this is where I've focused my learning over the past year. So I'm really excited to hear what he has to say. I have my pen and paper ready, so get yours out. Java, welcome to the show. Tell us about yourself and the path that led you to where you are as a consultant in the compounding pharmacy industry.
Yes, well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you guys, and I want to wish your listenership Happy New Year. A little bit about myself and the long road that's brought me to the world of consultancy is I started my career in continuous improvement about 24 years ago, and have worked and gained exposure working for large, great companies like Dow Chemical and Novartis and Nestle, organizations that really put a lot of investment in continuous improvement. And one of the things that I saw really over the course of my career, and I should mention too, that I wrapped up my corporate career before pounding up my own shingle, working as an operations leader and a continuous improvement leader for an international compounding supply company. So I really understand the industry from that perspective. So what I recognized during the course of my career is that lean or continuous improvement or Lean Six Sigma, choose your term, that it's only really been available for large organizations. It's essentially been priced out of reach, institutionalized, unnecessarily mystified, which has made it somewhat unattainable for small and mid-sized organizations. And I've noticed that in the world of pharmacy, they've been largely excluded from lean activity or continuous improvement exposure. So I saw an opportunity to start out something that would really cater to this need. Price within reach. These are simple tools, but they're very powerful, and it's very easy to pass them on to an organization so that they don't have a long-term, reliance on a consultant. So we started XLN at the start of 2017. And it's been really very gratifying working with small and mid-sized businesses, working with a lot of people in the pharmaceutical space, providing them their first exposure, and then experiencing some tremendous improvement on a very fast pace.
So the reason why Seth and I started this podcast was to keep raising the bar for quality and safety in the compounding pharmacy. It's really a passion for us, and so raising the bars is kind of at the core of your business as a process improvement consultant. So in some of the compounding pharmacies that you've been in, tell us about some of the things that you've seen and how you've really contributed and helped on that continuous improvement inside the lab space, inside the pharmacies.
It's a great question, and you're absolutely right. We really are in the same line of work. We're in the business of flow. And as you described, raising the bar for quality and safety, the same discipline that gives rise to great quality adherence, great safety compliance, is the very same discipline that an organization can leverage to implement continuous improvement. Once you can grab one of these areas, and once you establish the discipline there, you've really created the foundation for advancement in other areas. What I've noticed mostly in the area of compounding pharmacy and what the needs have been is really, and to make it very simple for our time here, what I want to do is I want to provide the listenership with a couple fundamental, very simple principles of continuous improvement that they can take and immediately begin to apply to their business. And so bring it back to the question. What I've seen that has been missing, or perhaps that many of my clients haven't had previous exposure to, was the concepts of waste and of value. And the ultimate purpose of continuous improvement is to eliminate waste, which we might define as anything the customer is not willing to pay for, and increase value, which we might define as anything the customer is willing to pay for. And so, examples of this are long processes that are affecting your delivery time. If you think about any point in your process where the work or the material that you're working to transform into the desirable form for the customer is sitting, if it's waiting, if it's queued up, that means value isn't being added, and you're going to throw in an unnecessary amount of resources at that. I'll expand on to say one more thing, which might help provide some context for this idea of waste and value. If you take a look at the value-added activities, in let's face the conversion of a material, raw materials into the desired compounded product, the person doing that work, or the people doing that work through the process, are like surgeons on a patient. You don't want them leaving the patient. The patient's the product. The pharmacist or the tech who's doing the work is the surgeon. And you want to make sure that they are spending their time, because they are value-added members of your organization, always working on the value-added work, the patient, in our case, the compounded product. So this is one thing I really encourage the listenership to do, is to take a walk from front to back or from back to front of your process, to spot any point in your process where you see product waiting, product queuing up. And you might have to walk all the way upstream before it's even in the form of a raw material or a finished good, and look at your paperwork processes. Are they queuing up? Are they piling up in stacks? The clock is always running, whether something is sitting and waiting or whether it's being processed.
So Java and I met each other. We were both speaking at a conference out in Oklahoma, and I kind of kicked off the morning speaking about safety and workflow, because workflow has always been that thing that's really passionate, near and dear to me. And that's actually where I started in this business talking before I got into the facility and the engineering and the lab design side. It was workflow. And it's interesting because when I got finished talking, Java come in behind me, and sure enough, it was a wonderful springboard. And we were kind of looking at each other like, wow, that was an awesome synergy, because we're kind of talking about the same thing. I'm looking at the safety side of it, and he's looking at the improvement side of it. And when you really mesh those two concepts together, it really is a phenomenal thing. And we're kind of collaboratively working on a technical white paper now, and tossing it back and forth. But it's always difficult. People have different schedules and different time frames. But we know that there's a way to marry these two ideas. And Javon, when you were there at that conference, you did something very interesting. It was really kind of off the cuff, something that I don't think anybody expected. You asked the group that was there to make peanut butter sandwiches. Can you walk us through that exercise and where the value was, and what it was, what were you trying to prove and show with that activity of making peanut butter jelly sandwiches?
Yes, thanks, Brian. And it was a great synchronicity that you and I happen to be right next to each other from a time slot perspective. You're right. We have so much in common, not just our exquisite hairstyles, but so much more beyond that. The peanut butter, and in this case, in this day and age, it's almond butter and jelly sandwich factory. That exercise is really designed to provide a very simple and impactful example of the strength, the power of these waste reduction activities. So here's some free stuff for the listenership. If you Google 8 wastes of lean, the number 8, the word waste, W-A-S-T-E. If you Google that, you will find numerous responses that will provide you with a list of the 8 wastes of lean. And if you take that list and you walk through your organization and you go on a waste hunt, you will find throughout your process numerous examples of areas where you can eliminate these wastes. Very simple concepts. Again, unnecessarily mystified by the institutions of lean continuous improvement. You can go do this yourself with your team, and I really encourage you to do it as a group. You can do it today. So getting back to the exercise, what we did is we exposed we did this, I think we had about an hour to do this, and half an hour was presentation. I went over the 8 wastes with the attendees at the conference, at the seminar, and then I said, all right, we've learned these, we understand the theories, let's apply what we've learned. And we set up almond butter and jelly sandwich assembly line, and we took some key metric measurements at the end of the first run. I think we did a total of 4 runs, and we measured the amount of scrap, the cycle time to get the first sandwich out. We had some additional quality measures, and the entire time we were checking in with the customer, because this is all about the voice of the customer. The customer pulls the value from your organization. And so each time the group was instructed to apply at least 2 of their learnings from the list of 8 wastes to eliminate 2 additional wastes. And by the time we got to the final, and I won't be able to remember specifically the numbers, but I think it's safe to say that we halved the bad and doubled the good in terms of cutting cycle time. We cut it by at least 50%. And Bryan, perhaps you remember, it could have been much more. It's not uncommon for us to see 80%, 85% reductions in cycle time, and doubling of throughput with no scrap errors after having a first run of the exercise littered with scrap. Long cycle time, really inefficient processes, and inefficient flow. It's a great tool to teach the team. And, for examples of that, if the listenership wants to reach out to Bryan and Seth, we can certainly provide the listeners with the standard work for leading that exercise if they want to take a crack at it with their teams themselves.
Yeah, I do recall that day. I think we were all amazed at how, I think the original work group was like about 8 folks per group. And then by the time you actually trimmed off a couple of folks off the team to send them to quote unquote another division that was opening up, again, it was a theoretical division. They were at half the staff and half the time. It was probably better than a 50% reduction. And what you proved is that, and we're not, of course, advocating, start laying people off and be more efficient, because that's not it at all. Of course, the process always has to be examined. But in this particular example, it was that the fewer people can accomplish the same thing in less time if the processes are efficient. And I think that's part of the lean. Years ago, when I worked for a manufacturer, I had the luxury of going through multiple lean, of course, we call them Kaizen events. And that, came from Toyota days. And I'm sure you could go off on a tangent about that and how it evolved. And it started with basically lots of different color Post-it notes and this huge wall of white paper. And we process mapped. I'm a huge fan. If you know me and you've seen me speak at conferences, I'm a huge fan of the process maps, because what you can do is you can ultimately determine where some of the exposures are, where some of the issues are, and of course, where some of the things that we can trim out of the process are. And that's all about the lean. And so I really feel like there was a huge benefit to that. So with that being said, can you give us some real life examples? Like, tell us about a pharmacy that you went in, you examine the process, you watch the technicians, you watch how they handle the ingredient through the encapsulation, through the end process, and then how you really brought the efficiency. Because time and money are big things for any business, and especially for a compounding pharmacy, because that's our intended audience here. So tell us give us an example of where and how you've saved some money and some time for some compounding pharmacies.
Yeah, thanks, Bryan, and I really appreciate you reminding me of 2 very important points before I answer the question at hand. So one thing we certainly don't want to do is start off or introduce any continuous improvement initiative with the intent of reducing headcount. As you free up people, you can deploy them or redeploy them to add greater activity. What I would say is this: at the point that you decide that you're going to embrace continuous improvement or lean as the way that you do your business, that is the point where you turn off your hiring valve and your capital valve. And you don't backfill attrition. You find ways to do more with less. These methods work everywhere that work is done, and they work every single time. The second point that, Bryan, you make that I think is also very important, and it was part of the power of the almond butter sandwich exercise, like what you do with process mapping, these involved training methods, or these engaged training methods, where the audience is part of applying the learning, seeing something visual, getting hands-on, applying the concepts, is the most effective approach to training and to problem resolution. So that is a good segue into an example. And I have to be careful not to get too specific, but I will say this, and I'm thinking about one particular large compounding pharmacy I had the pleasure of working with. Again, it's important to keep in mind that my approach is not to go in and solve the problems for clients. My approach is to go in, work side by side with the talented teams, teach them the methods as we solve the problems. In this particular case, we walked in and we asked the question, okay, so what is your biggest loss driver? What is hurting your business the most? What's consuming the greatest amount of resources? What keeps you up at night? This client identified one key process. It was a process that made up a pretty large percentage of their business, and really absorbed a number of resources. Took a tremendous amount of time, cycle time, to get this particular product out. So we worked with the team. We mapped the process just as Bryan described, and then we identified the waste in the process. Here again, we've provided the team with a little bit of 8 waste training. They're identifying the waste in the process. We're doing it with Post-it notes. So we have yellow Post-its representing each step. We're slapping the pink Post-its on there for waste, and then we say, okay, let us go remove that waste. Within just days, we identified the best practice, and I'll say the methods varied across their technicians and pharmacists, and we identified the best in-house practice, who had the highest quality and was able to do more in the least amount of time. And then we essentially trained the team to that method. We made it the standard method, thereby reducing the overall cycle time by 50%, increasing throughput, and ultimately really positively impacting the on-time delivery method. This did not take months, and it did not take weeks. We did it using what Bryan described as a Kaizen, or a rapid improvement activity, and we did it in one day.
So in weeks previous, on one of the intros, I talked about how I spend the first couple of weeks of the year for me personally, and that's sharpening the axe. And for those that may not have heard that intro, is that Abraham Lincoln had a saying that if he had 6 hours to chop down a tree, he'd spend the first 4 sharpening his axe. And what that is, that's about planning. It's really, planning for me is a big deal. And so one of the things that I delved into early this year, wanting to know more about, was project management. Because as a consultant, sometimes I get asked to help on the project management side, although I can't always be on site to do that, but still it's one of those things that I wanted to know more about. And so I learned the benefit of Gantt charts. And in years past, I'd heard the term Gantt chart, but never really put much into what it was. And so part of the presentation that I'm giving at the American College of Apothecaries out in Florida is I'm actually going to introduce this concept as part of the USP 800 compliance project, because it's kind of an overwhelming project, like where to start. And so do you have any recommendations or thoughts on how to implement the Gantt chart as part of a compliance project, or do you have any comments that you just want to make about that?
Bryan, I love that you asked the question. I have been, for the past, I think it's been about the past year, I've been introducing my clients to a product called Smartsheet. Just full disclosure, I receive no kickbacks or royalties. The reason I recommend Smartsheet, it's a project management tool, is that for one, it's priced well within reach. For one user license, I think it's like $15, and that's $15 per month, and you really only need one user license per site, because you can have a number of users. It's just that the registered user is the only one who can set up a new Smartsheet. Smartsheet itself is very intuitive, and they have a lot of great online tools. If you take a half-hour online orientation, you will be proficient with Smartsheet, and it allows you to break down your project into its constituent parts, and then the outcome is the Gantt chart. So it automatically populates a Gantt chart for you, which is your visual depiction of the project, which will show you the critical path or the longest leg of the project. Additionally, with Smartsheet, there's capability for you to be able to assign individuals responsible for each step and then set up alerts. So if a preceding step is complete, the individual who has the following step, the downstream step in the project, receives an alert through their email that they're ready to begin working. Additionally, if they run late, they receive notifications that their time is almost up. And then as far as the Gantt chart component, you can print that out, you can post it on the wall so that there's this visual representation out there in the world for people to walk by and get a real-time status update, a visual, and very immediate status project update.
Yeah, and I can tell you the value that I'm going to try to put on this and emphasize as well, because I can tell you probably Gantt charts are not going to be super common. And this particular episode is going to be for those truly technical geeks like us that we just really love delving into the weeds on certain issues. But one of the advantages of the Gantt chart that I'm going to introduce at the conference is, how does the design consulting, the architecture, the engineering, the general contractor sending out bids, receiving bids, demolition on the site, and again, all this is for USP 800 compliance. Mm-hmm. When does the flooring come in? When does the ceiling come in? When do they get the test and balance done on the room? And then there's other components of USP 800 compliance that is, choosing a designated person, rewriting the SOPs, inventorying the hazardous drugs on hand, performing risk assessments. There's so many steps, and part of the issue with where we're at right now with the implementation of USP 800 has been pushed back in an additional 17 months, and that gives people breathing rooms. But there's still, anytime people think about the overwhelming chapter, and it's really only 20 pages, but there's so many, there was over 200 musts. So there's the musts and there's the shoulds that are within any regulation. And there was over 200 musts, over 20 pages. And so, when everybody starts thinking about that, obviously cortisol goes up, dopamine goes down. They're like, I don't want to tackle this. It's that 800-pound gorilla that I don't want to be a part of. And so what I want to do and introduce at this particular conference is, here are the steps. I've given you the spreadsheet. It's in Gantt format. And now you can actually start to keep tabs on it, because I want to make sure that whenever I teach a concept, and I know you're exactly the same way, because it's what you do with the peanut butter and jelly, is we want to really drill it down to the most simplest form that we can, because then you can get true buy-in from where people are, where they need to be. And so that's one of the things I'm going to do. So I appreciate you giving us that piece of information on the Gantt. And I'll just pause there, see if you had any extra comments that you wanted to interject there.
Well, I mean, Bryan, you and I are so aligned in our approach to work, and really, it all starts with a plan. And you see all different methods for project management and for planning, and everything from Post-its on a wall to just notebooks, etc. Again, I can't emphasize enough the impact of the Gantt chart. It gives you the visual. I often encourage my clients, with these different programs, these packages like Smartsheet, or whether it's Microsoft Project or whatever it is, to not just rely on having the Gantt chart in the mind of the computer, resting somewhere in the server in the cloud, but to make sure that you get these visuals printed up hard copy and on the wall somewhere that removes all degrees of separation. And put it in a prominent space. This project, these preparations are the biggest things that people are going to be doing over the next year and a half, and they deserve some wall space, as well as a regular refresh schedule. But then that posted Gantt chart becomes a performance indicator for management to walk past, and gives them the opportunity to see if it looks like someone is off their timing, if a deliverable is not being made. Not so much a policing tool, but an opportunity for the leader of the organization to stop and say, hey, why aren't we hitting this timeline, this deadline? What obstacles do I need to remove in order for you to be able to achieve this?
Yeah, and as well, the visual component also empowers people. When we were into lean as the manufacturer, everything was visual. So you could walk into the engineering section, which is a big row of cubicles, and everything was visual. Anybody in customer service, anybody involved in the project manager, engineer management, anybody could essentially pick up the piece of information and know exactly where that project was at that exact moment. And then it also empowers people to start making decisions. So I will echo to say that, yes, the visual component of the charts, the Gantt, the to-dos. Those things are huge. So you've given us a lot of great information, and I can't thank you enough for being a part of it today. So is there any extra New Year's information that you'd like to press forward on our listenership?
I think it will be a terrific 2018, and the listenership will achieve a great many successes if they began to think of their processes in terms of value add and waste. And again, I encourage them to go out and do a Google search of the 8 wastes, get together with their teams, map the processes, identify the waste. You don't need special training to do this. Granted, there's established methodologies and frameworks for doing it, but just use a wall and Post-it notes, use a dry erase board. The most important part of continuous improvement is just that you as a business, you as a pharmacy, are setting up regular time on a weekly or on a monthly basis to get your talented team together to make improvements. And I would start with waste reduction and value increase.
So if any of our listeners out there would like to know more about what the services you offer, can you give us your email address or your contact information so that they can reach out to you and talk more about these concepts?
Yes, thanks, Bryan, for the opportunity to do that. I'll say that we are in the process, we've been in the process for quite a while. It's been a dynamic process of launching our website, but in the meantime, please feel free to reach out by email. I am very happy to support by email. If folks have questions, of course, it would, no charge. I get very excited about this, and if I can answer a few emails, a few questions by email, I'm happy to do so. My email address is jcoleman, and that's jcoleman at xlnconsulting.com, and that's the letter XLN consulting.com. And again, if there's anything that I could do to help get you started on your continuous improvement journey, I'd be very happy to help in any way possible.
Java, thank you. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure that the audience here has got a lot of great tidbits of information. So thank you. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Bryan. Thank you, Seth. And thank you to the listeners. Happy New Year. Have a successful and safe 2018.
Great show. I took a whole bunch of notes and have even more ideas for improvement. Thanks, Java. Again, if you have questions for Java, feel free to email him, jcoleman, jcoleman, at xlnconsulting.com. Thank you for listening this week. I've received a lot of really kind messages this week congratulating me for a year of doing this. Not the podcast, but since I launched pharmacyinspection.com. It's really great to hear those words of support and encouragement, so seriously, thank you. Next week, we have another legend in the world of compounding on the show, Lloyd Allen. Honestly, I cannot wait to speak with him and hear his perspective on where compounding is, where it's headed. It's going to be a great show. If you have questions, comments, please feel free to reach out. Email me at podcast@pharmacyinspection.com. You can also leave us a voicemail right on the website or contact me through Twitter at PharmacyInspect, Facebook, Instagram. Thanks again for listening. Of course, keep raising the bar.